So I say let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Gazai, and I'm the Director of Member Services and Learning at Orchestras Canada. Before we begin this webinar, I would like to acknowledge that Orchestras Canada is a virtual organization, which means that we work from where we live. My office is located in Kingston, Ontario, on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat, and I acknowledge the enduring presence of the First People. A bit of housekeeping information before we get started. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on our website in the coming weeks. And I also invite you, as we go through the presentation, to put any questions you have in the chat. There's going to be a Q&A at the end, and I'll be relaying those questions to our presenter today. This webinar was organized less than a week ago, and I would like to thank Lise Jubinville, who's manager of permit program delivery with Canadian Wildlife Services, for volunteering at the last minute to be here today. I would also like to thank her colleagues, Andrea Hooker, head of compliance promotion, as well as Jose Kamga, compliance promotion analyst. There are going to be some regulatory changes that will come into effect very soon. So we thought it was extremely important to share this information with all of you today. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Lise.
Good morning or afternoonish, depends where people are. So my name is Lise Jubinville. I am the manager for CITES permitting policy and operations. So I'll be presenting this, and I thank Andrea and Jose for having helped me immensely preparing this presentation, which I will share before I get too far. Right, so as David mentioned, there are changes coming soon near you, January 8th, that will have an impact on musical instruments and therefore musicians and orchestras. So I'm pretty sure you're not used to having the Canadian Wildlife Service, of all places, having an impact to your work or your movement, but here we go. Now you get to learn about us, and I'm sure you will enjoy the experience immensely. So what are we going to talk about? First of all, we're going to talk about this strange little concept called CITES, C-I-T-E-S, and you'll see why that's important to this whole story, and how CITES is administered. Why are we making this amendment to drive you crazy? What has changed from what we are doing right now? What has not changed? And then more specifically, we'll touch on the impact on the import or export of musical instruments. We are not targeting musical instruments. The changes have a much broader impact than that, but unfortunately you get caught in the crossfire, and so you need to know what this could mean for you. And the unfortunate side effect is you will need permits. And I'll explain why. And obtaining permits is not that hard. It costs $0, and we're very, very friendly. And we'll provide some contact information if you need more help. And there's some details I can't cover in a short presentation. You need to ask us something, you can always contact us. So first of all, we're covering what is CITES. So this is a fundamental part of this change. CITES is the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. And it's been around since 1973. Presently, there are 183 member countries, plus the European Union. And the purpose of CITES is to ensure that international trade of protected species does not threaten their survival. So we don't want to trade a species to death. Now, key thing here is trade does not necessarily mean commercial trade. It's just trade in the context of CITES means movement. So from one country to another country, something is moving between a country. It could be for personal reasons. It could be for scientific research. it doesn't necessarily mean money or commercial aspects. CITES currently protects, as of 2023, over 40,000 species are protected. And the way we manage the protection is through a permitting regime. So you need permits to move something and authorize the movement. Now, the 40,000 species are divided into 3 buckets, or 3 levels of protection. And we call those an appendix 1, 2, and 3. And appendix 1 is the highest level of protection you can have under CITES. And anything that's in appendix 1 has the strictest rules on trade. And generally commercial trade of appendix 1 species is frowned upon, but we do it under certain circumstances. Other important thing to note is, of those 40,000 species, about 35,000 of those are plants. So anybody who may have orchids in their house, cacti, including your Christmas cacti, those are all CITES listed species. And there's a lot of orchids. You can't even imagine how many there are. It drives you crazy. Now, when we protect species under CITES, it's in all forms. So it's dead or alive, whole, parts, products. And so it's broader than most people realize, because it's easy to see a species. You can see an elephant and you understand the protection for an elephant. You can identify an elephant tusk. It's pretty simple. But once it gets transformed into a product such as the keys on a piano, or parts, some mounts on bagpipes, or a little tiny element on top of your teapot, or chess pieces for an antique chess set, people do not see the elephant anymore. So that's why some people don't necessarily realize that CITES rules apply for things. Makes it a little bit more challenging. Now, how do we administer that in Canada? CITES is a convention, so it doesn't have any legal bearing. Each country has to implement the rules of CITES in their own domestic legislation. In Canada, that's done through our Act and our regulations, WAPREDA, Wild Animal and Plant Protection. I think you can read that. WAPREDA is shorter, so we call it that. And WAPTR, which are the regulations. So the changes that our minister announced in November are changes to our regulations, the WAPTR regulations. Now, something important to note is every 3 years, the CITES parties get together and we have a grand old time, and we have a conference of the parties, or a COP, just like there was the COP on the climate change. CITES also has a COP. And at that point, we would re-examine the protection or the species being protected and add more. Just note, the list never gets smaller. We can just add more species. And we can either just add species. We can say, oh, this species needs a higher level of protection, or the species needs to be protected in a different way. Or we can define different procedures or different approaches for permitting or permitting requirements. So the species that are protected, the rules for protection of those species, and the impact on musical instruments. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, 3 years later, it can all change. It's a very dynamic environment. For those of you who've been around for a while, you may remember 2017 when CITES decided it was going to protect all rosewoods, which are used in quite a few musical instruments. including African blackwood, which doesn't sound like a rosewood because it's called blackwood, but it's used in clarinets and bagpipes. And Indian rosewood is used in about 80% of all guitars. So we caused quite a kerfuffle at that time. You just never know when we're going to come up with something crazy for you. If you were looking for something to do, you can read the CITES Convention and all the resolutions and figure out all our insanity at CITES.org. And if you ever needed to know if something you have or a species you have is protected under CITES, there is the checklist. And if you enter the scientific name of the species, then you'll be able to see the CITES protected or not. Always important to use scientific names because common names are never helpful. Rosewood is a perfect example. Rosewood is used for quite a wide range of different species. And like I mentioned, African blackwood doesn't sound like a rosewood, but it is a rosewood. So scientific names is your friend. So the minister announced in November that we are going to increase the protections for elephant tusks, ivory, and rhinoceros horn. And what we're doing in Canada is we're going above and beyond what is required under CITES. So CITES has already a benchmark on protection levels for the trade or movement of elephant and rhinoceros that are alive, whole, or in parts. And that's been around since 1975. Canada already has slightly stricter measures than CITES. However, at the global level, the populations of both elephants and rhinoceros are threatened. And part of the threat is poaching. And poaching is done to fuel the demand for the ivory or the tusks or the horns. So we do not want to be supporting any of that. We do not want Canada to be involved in any way, shape, or form in that. So we're putting in place extra measures to ensure that Canada's involvement in the international trade is limited and it's very controlled, as well as improving the monitoring. So it's not only, we're not restricting all trade, but the trade that is allowed, we want to make sure that we track it and we know what is Canada's part in all of this movement of elephant tusks and rhino horns across the world. Canada's a small player, but if we don't shore up our defenses, then Canada's going to look like a weak link. And they're going to say, oh, look at that, Canada has no rules, so we can send our stuff there. So we're bridging some of those gaps. And there are restrictions on trade for ivories, primarily, done by many other countries. So we are part of the gang of countries that are increasing the protection levels. The UK has strict measures, Israel, New Zealand, Australia, US, the list goes on and on. So we are doing our part. Everybody's doing it slightly differently, of course, because why make it easy? But Canada's efforts are, the main impact on the changes will be on the area that has the highest conservation value for the survival of the species. So what have we done? Mainly the biggest change, which doesn't really have an impact for musical instruments, is raw elephant tusk. So the tusk, not carved, not transformed or anything, or the rhinoceros horn. Import, export prohibited. We're not having none of that. There is no, you can't go to Africa and hunt an elephant and bring back your tusks as a trophy. It's a no. So prohibited, that's a pretty harsh term. It's not fully prohibited. There are some purposes where we will allow the raw horns or raw tusks, but it's for museums, it's for scientific research, it's for our enforcement officers so they can send a tusk for legal proceedings or receive some tasks for legal proceedings. So it's very limited and for purposes that are not related to potential fraud. So that's raw. Now worked or transformed tusks or rhino horns. Now you need permits for any movement. If it's going into Canada or leaving Canada, a permit is required. There has been, and there will be until January 8th, there's a personal and household effects exemption that's defined under CITES and under regulations, which would allow you to, oh, you're relocating to the US, I'm filling up my moving truck, and I'm going to put in my kitchen table, my dishes, my lamps, my piano, and all my other towels and all my stuff. And I'm going to drive to the US and I'm moving to a new home there. Currently, that is exempt. You do not need a permit because that's your personal bubble, and it is exempt under CITES. Or if I had some bagpipes that I carry with me everywhere I go, and I'm traveling to visit some friends in France, I could pack them in my bags, check luggage, and I don't need a permit. But as of January 8th, that exemption no longer applies in Canada, so there are permits required all the time. Any movement in or out requires a permit. And this doesn't matter how old or new the tusk or the rhinoceros horn is, the same rules apply. Ivory, rhino horn, permits are required, old or new. What has not changed? We haven't gone completely insane. You can still own your elephant tusks, your ivory, your rhinoceros horn. If it's legally entered Canada, legally obtained, you can still own it. You can still buy or sell within Canada any of these things, whether it's raw or worked products, carvings, whatever. Within Canada, the movement is still allowed. It's the only thing that changes once you start moving across the international border. And we also have not changed any of the requirements that exist currently for import or export of ivory from other species. So there's walrus ivory, narwhal, hippopotamus teeth. There's other things that are called ivory, but we're only targeting the elephant ivory. Mammoth ivory. It's too late for us to protect the species. They are extinct. So there is no permitting for mammoth. It's just sometimes it does need to be identified as such. You can't just say, oh, this is mammoth ivory and have no documentation to support that. It does need to be clearly documented. So now, what does it mean to you? Because I'm talking theoretical here. So now, what does it impact will have on musical instruments themselves? So I've created two tables. One is for musicians, so individuals who are doing some movement of instruments, and then we'll talk about musical groups or musical ensembles. So an individual who is exporting, as in moving, relocating something from Canada to another country, will require a permit. You need to re-export or export it. Just for the geeks out there, when I say re-export certificate, the reason we say re-export is elephants do not exist in Canada, so the ivory had to come from somewhere else before it came to Canada, so that's why we're re-exporting it out. If you want to bring some ivory, an instrument made with ivory into Canada, the foreign CITES permit for export is required, as well as a Canadian CITES import permit. Both of those permits are required to come into Canada. So that's a move. So it's leaving Canada, go to another country, or going from another country to come into Canada. It's just a movement. Now, there's also the case where someone, a musician, is traveling with an instrument. So you're going on tour. So you're leaving Canada, you're going to go to the US, then you're going to go to Mexico, then you're going to fly over to France, and then you're going on a world tour. And you want to bring your bagpipes. Well, then you're going to need a Canadian CITES temporary movement certificate. Now, a temporary movement certificate's been around for quite a while, and just consider it as a passport for your instrument. So it allows multiple border crossings, valid for 3 years, and you can go wherever you want. And it's a pass through to travel with CITES. Now, musicians from another country coming to Canada and they're on touring through Canada will need the CITES musical instrument certificate. Why does Canada call ours a temporary movement certificate and others call musical instrument certificate? It's just because the musical instrument certificate was defined under CITES fairly recently, I think 2017 or 2019, and Canada had been using the term temporary movement certificates for a long time before that, so we haven't changed the name. It's the same thing. But you would get a foreign CITES musical, or the foreign musician would have to get their own CITES musical instrument certificate. And we need a temporary import-export certificate. And as I had mentioned earlier, part of the reason or part of the change we're making is we need to monitor anything coming in and out, anything with ivory or rhino horn. So the foreign musical instrument certificate doesn't allow us to track anything, but our own Canadian temporary import-export certificate allows us to track the entry of the instrument and the departure of the instrument. So it's basically a temporary pass to enter and leave Canada with the instrument. So that's new. For a musical ensemble, so an orchestra, a piping band, any group that has instruments that could have ivory or rhino horn, it looks very, very similar to musicians. Musical ensembles never had the personal exemption because they're not a person. So they always required permits. So the steps look pretty much exactly the same as for musicians. I just like to make it clear just because I'm very linear and literal, and I need to explain it very clearly for my team. So it looks pretty close, and it is the same. Now, yay, you need permits. Nothing makes people happier than filling out paperwork and submitting requests to the government to get some permits. But there is no option. This will be enforced January 8th. So when coming into force, if anything moving in or out of Canada with elephant ivory or rhino horn, at the border, they will stop. And they say, do you have the CITES permits? Do you have all the permits you require? So you need to get the permits. Now, the permits that will be issued in this case are all done through my office. So my team is it. We are CITES Canada, and we will be issuing all those permits. It is not that hard. It costs you $0 plus tax. The process is quite simple. We are not there to say no. We are there to help you, and we're there to give you the right documents. So we are very, very friendly, and there's never a wrong answer. It's just sometimes we'll ask for clarification or for extra details, but we are there to help. We have a web page where our application forms are located. Not the easiest to navigate, So your best option is to call us or write to us. CITES office, we have a toll-free number, and we have our email address. I monitor the email address, so if there's any questions or people need some help, I will see the questions and I will provide, either myself or someone from my team will help you out. So you have any questions about import or export, anything related to elephant tusk, any CITES species, what permits do I need, what form do I need, what do I need to provide you, how do I fill out section 3, or how do I fill out this, then you can give us a call. So when we're asking people, when we're doing the permitting, or what we're trying to check is legal acquisition. Where did you get this instrument? Did you buy it? Did you receive it as a gift? Do you have any paperwork that goes with it? How old is it? Is there any markings? Is there any manufacturer? Is there any serial number? What does it look like? Where is the ivory? If it's a bagpipe, how many ivory mounts do you have on it? If it's any other kind of instrument, is the piano, how many ivory keys do you have? What's the serial number for that piano? And any information you can gather, or this expert has assessed this instrument, it says it was manufactured in the 1920s, anything that you have that can support your requests. If we don't have enough information, we'll ask for it and work with you to get the information that we need. And if you have any questions about the regulations themselves, then it would be my colleague Andrea Hooker and her team. They're the ones who have more expertise in the regulations. I am just there, I'm the operations, so I just make it work. What was I gonna say? Oh yes, please note, we're talking about the elephant ivory and rhino horn. I don't know if rhino horns are really used in instruments. I've never heard of it, but I'm willing to be surprised. The permitting requirements also apply for Brazilian rosewood. So Brazilian rosewood is a special case. Most musical instruments made with rosewood, in the general sense, do not need permits. However, Brazilian rosewood is very special, and it's been protected under CITES since 1992, and it always needs a permit. Brazilian rosewood, I don't know if it's used in orchestra instruments. I know it's often used in guitars, acoustic guitars, older guitars from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. There's potential there. So yeah, just be careful if you have some Brazilian rosewood, because then you need to talk to me. And that's the end of my story. And so I will relinquish the screen.
All right, thank you so much, Elise. We had a couple questions come in. First one from Don Catapan from the TSO. How long are the Canadian Temporary Movement Permit and Foreign Musical Instrument certificates valid for?
Musical instrument certificates, those are valid for 3 years. The temporary certificate, to allow someone from another country to come in temporarily and leave, it's custom, so it will be based on how long the musician or the orchestra is in Canada. So we'll say, when do you think you're coming in, and when do you think you're going to be leaving? So that one is more custom made for the entry and exit.
Amazing, thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the processing is super easy for that one, since the foreign country has done most of the work. So we're just kind of cut and pasting, so we don't have to do any analysis.
Makes it a bit more straightforward.
Yes.
One from Arthur Gregor here. How about shell use in inlay? Some inlay that's shell looks like ivory, and then rosewood if the guitar is fitted as to construction before CITES permit still required.
Like, what kind of shells are we talking about? Like tortoise shell or?
I'm not sure. I can follow up. I'll follow with Arthur. But there's a question for guitar with rosewood if that guitar was sort of built before the requirement for the permit.
Yeah, a permit's required with Brazilian rosewood if it was built before. The reason the permit is required is the CITES office does the verification, and the permit is the proof saying this guitar is old enough, or that we've done the verification that is before it was listed in CITES, everything's cool. If you don't have a permit and you come to the border, and the border agents are going to say, yeah, I don't know. You don't want to take chances with the border officials. Some of them have very little sense of humor. If you want to keep your instrument, it's better to get the permit. Let us do the work of giving you the authentication for the instrument, and then you have it.
Perfect, thank you. I follow up and if I hear any more details about the shell question, I'll let you know. We had one question from Heather Noonan from the League of American Orchestras. US issued and EU issued CITES permits must be credentialed by each country through which a musician travels, and this is the means by which countries track movements. Can you speak to how the credentialing process will work for Canadian issued permits?
It's the same as any others. If you have to present it at the border, it gets stamped at the border. It's the same. I don't think the border process is that hard in Canada. It may be a little bit more difficult for other countries to do the border crossing. We have engaged with CBSA, the Canadian Border Services. They are aware of the requirements. If they have any questions, they'll reach out to us or to me or to our enforcement. They are fully aware of the process. So there should be no hiccups with our border agents. Most of the time, they may not even be aware, so you may have to kind of shove the document in their face because they're distracted.
Thank you. And I got some details about the shell, and we're talking about the mother of pearl,
Yes.
which I'm not familiar with.
Mother of pearl is one of those generic terms that can refer to so many things. It's the inside of a shell, like a mollusk. So it can mean just about anything. We do not issue permits for that. It may cause some hiccups in other countries, but we are like the species of mollusks where you could get the mother of pearl are so few in CITES that the risk, as far as I'm concerned, the risk is so low that I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I got other things
Fair
to
enough.
do.
Another one here.
Different thing.
People have a lot of questions, which is great. One from Greg Sheldon. Does the permit require dates of crossing, or are they good for multiple/unlimited crossings for the 3 years?
We used to have on our form, which I removed, it would say, when you get a crossing, where are you going to cross, all these things. I removed that. I don't care. I'm giving you a blanket authorization for 3 years. You can go 20 times, 5 times, 1 time. You want to cross through Toronto Pearson, you want to go through little border crossings in Manitoba. Does not matter to me.
Thank you. One more question from Christina Zacharias. Could you talk a bit more about the process of applying on behalf of an ensemble? Does an ensemble permit also last for 3 years?
Yes, it lasts for 3 years. Our forms are not super friendly for larger groups. So what we recommend is spreadsheets are always better. And I think we've done that for L'Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal at one point. And we just said, give me a spreadsheet that says lists the instruments, what is it, and basically do it by a spreadsheet format. For each instrument, we need the documentation on the origin, the age, where did you get it from, any details on its story, and any identification, because you can imagine at the border, you know, one guitar looks like another guitar, one African gray parrot looks the same as another one. So we try to give them some hints. That's why when we're asking for the description of things, it's not so much for us, but it's for the guy at the border, the person. It could be a guy or girl, but the person at the border has to be able to see the permit, look and say, oh, okay, yeah, that's a piano, and I can see the different elements. Now, I don't know if you could tell a cello from a bass. I don't know, but at least we can give the best description possible.
Great. A few more questions are coming in here. One from Kelly Kamadowski. How long does it take to receive a temporary movement permit?
The Canadian permits that we issue our service standard is 35 calendar days, but it's a first come first serve. So if there's a lot of people ahead of you in the line, it may take us a while to get to your request, but we do our darndest to get everything done in 35 calendar days. But that calendar days, if we are missing something and we need to send you a request for clarification or additional paper, we stop the clock because it's 35 days of our time. But if you take 3 weeks to answer my question, then that's on you. However, if there's a last minute thing, it needs you weren't expecting this, and oh my God, I have to leave in 3 weeks. Then it's important to let us know, to say, I apologize. I didn't realize I needed it so quickly. Is there any way you guys can put a little rush on it? And we will do our best to do it. But everybody can't be urgent. We have a very small team, a mighty team of 5. So only so many urgents I could do.
All right, we have another one here from Christina Zakaris again. What kind of documentation is required for instruments like violin bows that use mammoth ivory? Is a letter from the maker acceptable?
Yes.
That was an easy answer.
Yeah, and it's always useful when you have these letters to say, not just say, is mammoth ivory, take my word for it. You usually say, I'm an expert, I've been doing this for 20 years, and this is my thing, and I did based on my evaluation of. So your story has to be solid, so it can't be just trust me. We don't usually go for just trust me. We're very skeptical people.
That sounds about right. One more question from Ian Moore. Are we obligated to declare such items as we go into the US or other countries, or do we simply wait for them to inquire and then should we have the correct documentation?
Yeah, CITES is a bit aggravating for that. You do have to go through and present the documents at the border. And CITES, unlike other things, you have to tell the border agents when you're going out, and you have to tell the border agents when you're coming in. So you have to present your documentation to Canadian Border Services when you're leaving Canada. And then if you're going to the US, you tell the US border agents, here's my CITES document to stamp it. Yeah, and Heather has a good comment there. So often it's a little bit challenging when you're leaving Canada to say, well, I have to talk to a border agent. I never talk to a border agent when I'm leaving. So sometimes the half the trick is to find the border agent and make them look at your documents. They are aware of it. It's just not always easy to find them. I managed to find them in the Ottawa airport. I don't know where they hide in airports when you're leaving. I know where they are when you're coming in, but they can help you find them by each other. It's easy, like at a land crossing, it's pretty easy. Like they're right there, but it's airports are a little bit weird.
That sounds good. And then I think everything else we received were either thank you notes or just notes for us to share the content with people. There was a note from Heather Noonan again from the League of American Orchestras. In the US, only specific designated ports have officials qualified to credentials cited as permits, and this is not done by general custom officials. Printing a document to a general US custom official can cause problems, so it's important to note which ports are designated for credentialing, and there's a Heather posted a link there.
Okay, I was gonna say
that might be helpful.
Yeah, I could have sent that, but since Heather has helped too. Yeah, the US are weird. That's all I can say. Like they, you can go to any border in Canada and get things stamped, but the US is special.
I'm going to be very selective.
They're very selective.
Right. Perfect. Yeah. There's one more question that just came in here. Rosewood seems to be used as a generic term for tuning pegs and tail pieces. Is there a method of determining if these are made from Brazilian rosewood by inspection?
No. No, the problem, as he was mentioning, is rosewood is a generic term. It's very aggravating because it covers a wide range of different scientific names, and it's not very specific. In CITES, we're targeting Dalbergia SPP or anything under Dalbergia. Brazilian rosewood is Dalbergia nigra, but when like it's easy to identify it if I had a log or a sawn piece of wood, Brazilian rosewood versus Indian rosewood versus any other kind of rosewood, you can tell them apart. But once it's transformed, it's been stained, it's been varnished, it's been like you have this tiny amount, it's really hard to know. And you don't want to have someone try and figure it out by doing some destructive testing, because that is not destructive, it's not good. So, I mean, it's sometimes easier just to get the permit and just assume the worst. That's what we do. Just assume the worst. Assume it's Brazilian rosewood. You get the permit, you're safe. Even if it wasn't Brazilian rosewood, at least you're safe. You have the permit, and nobody's going to ask you questions and say, "Oh, are you sure?" And "Oh, I think that's Indian rosewood." You have the permit. They're happy. It makes them happy. If it makes them happy, you will be happy.
And I think we had Matt Heller post kind of a very similar question. She said, I'm just curious about cases where original documentation is difficult or impossible to obtain, such as cases where an instrument has no papers. Would there be luthiers qualified to assess material, or would we need to show the instrument to a wildlife specialist? I'm assuming it's go with the safe side, get the permit, and then...
Yeah, and luthiers or any antique stores or auction houses, they sometimes can identify, oh, I know based on my experience in the style, or this person only did instruments and they only use, it's easier, like guitars and pianos are easy because it tends to be certain manufacturers and you have history. Luthiers are good for other types of instruments, or an affidavit. Say, I've had this instrument, it was given to me by my grandfather, and like if you're willing to write it up and give us the details on it, We'll take your word for it.
I see. I think that's all for questions. There was a good crowd with a lot of great questions. Oh, one more just came in. Any advice for ensembles traveling by air over the US border about how to find a border official to stamp the certificates?
I think, I don't know what link Heather sent, but there is a link where you can find the border officials in the US. So that's what I would recommend. I can send it to you in Pearson. Oh, you mean the Canadian Border Services in Pearson? Good question. On the way out, I don't know where they are. I don't even remember how I found them in the Ottawa airport. I know they're really hard to find. What I would suggest is that you call CBSA, call Canadian Border Services and say, I'm doing this. Where do I go to get my documents validated? I need to talk to a border agent and they should be able to help you out. Because each airport will be different, and just be aware sometimes of they're open 9 to 5 or 8 to 4 or something like that.
Good to know and take under consideration. Planning.
Yeah, I mean, you'll always find them when you come into Canada because they're waiting to see you.
They'll greet you.
Yeah, greet you. They're there, so they must be there somewhere. You need one of them to turn around and say, stop looking at things coming in. You need to look at things going in.
And we had another last comment from Heather that said that the US credentialing offices are not always at the airport, so plenty of advanced planning will be required. So it all comes down to planning.
Yeah. And just try that with a live animal. It's even harder.
Yeah. All right, well, it looks that's all the questions we had. Really great, good crowd and really great response. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lise, for taking the time today to speak to all the attendants. Thank you, Andrea and Jose, for also being available for this. This was really appreciated. As we said before, the recording and the slides will be made available on the Orchestras Canada website in the coming days. We're doing our best to get it up there as soon as we can. Because as everybody knows, but as Lise knows even better, January 8th is approaching quickly. So we're doing our best to get the information out as much as we can. Feel free to share it with anybody that you think may have interest in this, or that information might be useful too. In the meantime, thank you so much, Lise, again. That was really great. I wish everybody a good day and happy holidays. And yeah, that's all, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.